The first time my son tried to make me sign my own life away, he slid the papers across a polished mahogany table and smiled like he was doing me a favor. "Just sign it, Mom," he said. "At your age, this is the responsible thing." Then I noticed the line that transferred everything I owned to him before I was even dead. "Evening, everyone. Grace here. And I'll say this right now. Anytime somebody rushes an old woman into signing papers, there's usually something rotten underneath the ink. Tell me in the comments if you'd trust your own kids with your will. My name is Clara Winslow. I was 79 years old that autumn, living alone in Marblehaven, Maine, in the same weathered cedar house my husband Walter built with his own hands in 1968. Tourists loved taking pictures of it in summer because of the crooked widow's walk and the faded blue lobster buoy hanging near the porch. To me, it wasn't charming. It was home. Every warped floorboard knew my footsteps. Every window carried some memory. That morning, my son Nathaniel picked me up in his silver Audi and drove me to a notary office near the marina without fully explaining why. "You worry too much," he kept saying as we passed the harbor. "This is standard planning stuff." Standard planning. Funny phrase. When a man starts using phrases instead of emotions, trouble usually follows. The office smelled like leather chairs and burnt espresso. There was one of those expensive olive trees in the corner that looked fake, no matter how alive it probably was. Nathaniel sat beside me, while a narrow-faced notary named Graham Lyle arranged documents into neat little piles. "Your son's just trying to protect you," Graham said, with a practiced smile. "Protect me from what exactly? Seagulls?" I adjusted my glasses and looked down at the papers. Most of it was dense legal language designed to exhaust old eyes. But I spent 30 years doing bookkeeping for Walter's boat repair business. Men always assumed I didn't understand numbers because my hands smelled like cinnamon and dish soap. They usually regretted that mistake. About halfway down page 4, I found it. In the event of diminished cognitive reliability, full authority over financial and residential assets shall transfer to Nathaniel Winslow. I read it twice, then a third time. Residential assets? That meant my house. Financial assets? That meant my savings, investments, Walter's accounts, everything. Before I was even buried. My fingers stayed still on the paper, but inside my chest, something cold unfolded itself slowly, like a knife being opened under a table. Nathaniel leaned closer. "You okay?" I looked at him carefully. My son was 52 now. Expensive haircut, expensive watch, smile too rehearsed. He looked more like a man preparing a sales pitch than someone worried about his mother. "I forgot my reading glasses," I lied. "You're wearing them?" I smiled softly. Then I forgot the stronger pair. His jaw tightened for half a second. That was the moment I knew, not suspected, knew. This wasn't concern. It wasn't planning. It wasn't family responsibility. Nathaniel needed my signature for something urgently enough that my hesitation irritated him. Graham awkwardly cleared his throat. "We can always reschedule." Nathaniel forced a laugh. "Mom's stubborn. She gets that from my father." Walter used to say stubbornness was just dignity with dirt under its fingernails. "I'll review everything at home," I said calmly, folding the papers. Nathaniel's smile disappeared completely now. "There's really no reason for that." "Oh, I think there is." Silence. You could hear the faint hiss of the espresso machine outside the office door. Then Nathaniel leaned back and crossed his arms. "You know, Mom, these things get complicated at your age." At your age, there it was, not concern. Positioning, like I was already halfway senile and simply hadn't accepted it yet. I stood carefully, taking my purse. Then it's a good thing I'm still smart enough to read before signing. The drive home was quiet. Nathaniel kept both hands tight on the wheel as we passed the docks, where lobster traps sat stacked like crooked towers near the water. Fog rolled over the harbor in pale ribbons. Marblehaven always looked beautiful right before winter turned cruel. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he finally muttered. "For who?" He didn't answer. When we reached my house, he carried my bag to the porch, but didn't follow me inside. "You should think about assisted living, too," he said suddenly. "That staircase is dangerous." I looked past him toward the ocean. Walter built that staircase after a hurricane damaged the original one. Worked 3 nights straight under floodlights because he refused to leave the house unfinished before Christmas. Dangerous. People always call memories dangerous when they want to sell them. "I'll manage," I said. Nathaniel exhaled sharply through his nose. "Fine, but don't wait too long." Then he got back into the Audi and drove away so fast the gravel spit across the driveway. I stayed on the porch for a while, listening to the waves hit the rocks below the bluff. The air smelled like salt, wet cedar, and somebody nearby cooking haddock chowder. Then I went inside, straight to Walter's old desk. And for the first time in my life, I opened the locked bottom drawer without feeling guilty. Walter's desk still smelled faintly of pipe tobacco, even though he'd been dead 11 years. Strange how certain scents outlive people. Cedarwood, engine oil, bay rum aftershave. Sometimes grief hides in the smallest things. The bottom drawer resisted at first when I pulled it open. Walter always overstuffed it with papers until the wood swelled crooked from humidity coming off the harbor. I finally jerked it loose hard enough to rattle the brass lamp sitting on top. Inside were folders, envelopes, tide maps, old invoices from the boatyard, and the thick green ledger Walter trusted more than banks. I sat down slowly in his chair and started sorting through everything while rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows. Nathaniel thought I was confused. That amused me now. A confused woman doesn't spend 40 years balancing business accounts while her husband rebuilt diesel engines with men who forgot to pay invoices until she appeared at the dock, carrying a clipboard and a look sharp enough to gut cod. By sunset, my dining table looked like the aftermath of a courthouse explosion. Property tax statements, investment summaries, insurance papers, old maritime permits. And then I found something stranger. A cream-colored folder labeled simply, Harbor Rights. Do not discard. Walter's handwriting. I frowned and opened it carefully. Inside were maps of the shoreline behind our house, legal diagrams of the dock, copies of town council approvals dating back to the 70s, and several letters from Marblehaven's historical committee. Most of it meant little at first glance, but one line kept repeating itself. Protected access corridor. I read slower, then slower still. Apparently, decades ago, Walter had negotiated permanent protected water access tied to our property because his repair workshop serviced emergency rescue boats during storm seasons. That tiny strip of shoreline behind my house wasn't ordinary residential land anymore. It carried special historical and commercial restrictions, which explained a lot, especially Nathaniel's sudden interest in my safety. I leaned back in the chair, hearing the old radiator hiss softly in the corner. Outside, fog crawled over the water until the harbor lights looked like floating candles. Then my phone rang. Nathaniel. I stared at the screen before answering. "Hi, sweetheart." "You looked upset earlier." he said immediately. No greeting, no warmth. Straight to damage control. I just don't want you misunderstanding anything. I understand perfectly fine. Silence. Then came the careful voice people use around explosives. Well, maybe we should simplify things. You know paperwork can get overwhelming. I almost laughed. You always hated paperwork, I replied. Remember sophomore year? You forged my signature on your chemistry grade because you were too scared to show your father. Nathaniel exhaled impatiently. Mom, that was 30 years ago. Yes. Funny what people remember. Another silence. Then he switched tactics. You know Brianna worries about you living alone. Brianna. My daughter-in-law had perfected the art of fake concern. Every sentence from that woman sounded dipped in artificial sweetener. How kind of her, I said. You fell last winter. I slipped on ice carrying groceries. You could have broken your neck. I didn't. You're missing the point. No, Nathaniel, I thought. You are. I'll review the papers this week, I said calmly. That's final. His voice tightened again. The attorney already prepared everything. And I already survived childbirth without anesthesia. We'll both endure disappointment. He hung up harder than necessary. I sat there smiling to myself for almost 10 seconds before realizing something uncomfortable. I wasn't sad. Not yet. Mostly, I was angry. Not because he wanted money. People have wanted money since the first caveman traded shiny rocks for goats. No. What burned was the way he looked at me now, like I was furniture, like I existed somewhere between inconvenience and obligation. That hurt worse than greed. The next morning, I drove into town early before the tourists crowded Main Street. Marblehaven looked sleepy under low gray clouds. Fishermen unloaded crates near the docks while gulls screamed overhead like tiny demons fighting over breakfast. I parked beside Bellwether Archives, an old brick building squeezed between a bakery and a nautical antiques shop that sold brass sextants nobody actually used anymore. June Bellwether herself sat behind the archive desk wearing fingerless gloves and drinking tea that smelled aggressively medicinal. Well, she said without looking up, either someone died or someone's getting sued. Mornin' to you, too. That finally made her grin. June had known Walter since high school and distrusted almost everybody equally, which made her one of my favorite people. What do you need? I handed her the harbor rights folder. For 20 minutes, she read in silence while I wandered between shelves filled with maps and shipping records. Somewhere nearby, an old heater clanged like a prison pipe. Finally, June removed her glasses. Clara, your son knows what this property actually is, doesn't he? That depends. What is it? She slid one document toward me and tapped the highlighted section. If this land gets sold commercially, the entire shoreline classification changes. Developers would pay a fortune for access like this. A strange heaviness settled into my stomach. How much of a fortune? June gave a low whistle. Enough to turn polite relatives into hungry animals. I looked back down at Walter's papers. Suddenly, Nathaniel's urgency made perfect sense. Not my health, not my safety, not family planning. Land. It was always land. And for the first time since Walter died, I felt something old waking up inside me. The same cold instinct that used to surface whenever contractors tried cheating us at the shipyard. People mistake kindness for weakness all the time, right until kindness stops cooperating. 3 days passed before Nathaniel invited me to dinner. Not asked, invited. There's a difference. When your own child starts speaking to you the way bankers speak to clients, you notice it immediately. "It'll just be family," he said over the phone. "Brianna made osso buco. Elowin's coming too." That last part mattered. He knew it would. My granddaughter Elowin was the only person in the family who still visited without needing something signed, borrowed, transferred, or explained. She came for tea, gossip, and my blackberry cardamom jam. That alone made her suspiciously rare these days. So Friday evening, I drove out to Nathaniel's place north of Marblehaven, where all the newer houses sat oversized and smug along the cliffs. The house looked like a catalog photo. Huge windows, cold stone exterior. One of those front doors so tall it made normal people feel underdressed. Brianna opened it, wearing cream-colored silk and the same smile funeral directors use. "Clara," she said brightly, "you found the place." "Yes, the roads still work." Her smile twitched slightly. Inside smelled like truffle oil and expensive candles. Somewhere soft jazz played quietly enough to remind everyone the owners had money, but not enough personality for silence. Elowin hugged me immediately. "Grandma, you look pretty." "You need stronger eyesight," I whispered, making her laugh. Nathaniel emerged from the dining room carrying wine glasses. "Mom?" There it was again. No hug, no warmth, just Mom. Like punctuation. Dinner started pleasantly enough. Brianna discussed some charity auction. Nathaniel talked about interest rates and property values. Elowin mostly stayed quiet, scrolling occasionally through her phone beneath the tablecloth. Then the conversation shifted exactly where I knew it would. "You still climbing those stairs alone?" Nathaniel asked casually while cutting into his veal. "Usually 1 foot at a time." Brianna laughed too hard. Nathaniel ignored it. "Seriously, Mom, that house is becoming too much for you." "I've managed 40 years." "You managed 40 years younger." There's something fascinating about how cruel people become when they believe they're being reasonable. Brianna folded her napkin delicately. "We actually toured a lovely senior community last month. Hawthorne Rest." Community. Another one of those polished little words. "Sounds contagious," I said. Elowin snorted into her water glass. Nathaniel shot her a look before turning back to me. "They have medical staff, security, transportation. I have a front door lock and neighbors with shotguns. Marblehaven already has security." "Mom?" "There it is again," I said quietly. "What?" That tone, like I'm difficult instead of alive. The room went still for a second. Outside the giant windows, waves crashed against the dark rocks below the cliffs. Somewhere farther down shore, a foghorn groaned through the night. Brianna recovered first. "Nobody's attacking you, Clara." Funny thing about people who say that. They usually already did. Then Nathaniel made his mistake. "You don't really need all that property anymore anyway." Not house, not home. Property. I looked at him carefully across the candlelight, and suddenly I saw it clearly. Not my little boy who used to bring me chipped sea glass from the beach, but a tired middle-aged man staring at waterfront acreage while pretending to see his mother. Elowin set her fork down harder than necessary. "Dad!" "What?" Nathaniel snapped. "I'm being practical." "No," I said softly. "You're counting." That landed. I could tell by the way Brianna immediately reached for her wine. Then I noticed something sitting partially hidden beneath a stack of mail on the kitchen counter nearby. A folder, dark blue, stamped with silver lettering. Cove and Finch Developments. Nathaniel saw where my eyes went and casually moved his jacket over it. Too casually. Interesting. Very interesting. The rest of dinner tasted like ash and expensive sauce. When I finally stood to leave, Elowyn walked me outside while Brianna pretended to package leftovers I knew she'd throw away the second I left. Cold ocean wind whipped across the driveway. "Grandma," Elowyn said quietly, "are you okay?" I studied her face under the porch light. Honest eyes. Walter's eyes. "I will be." She hesitated. "Dad's been acting weird lately." "Oh, sweetheart," I said, opening my car door. "People don't suddenly become strange. They just stop hiding it." Then I drove home through the fog with one thought repeating in my mind the entire way. Nathaniel wasn't preparing for my death. He was preparing for my property. I barely slept that night. Not because I was frightened. Because my mind wouldn't stop assembling pieces. Nathaniel's pressure about the will, the sudden concern for my safety, the developer folder hidden under his jacket, the way Brianna kept talking about my house like it was already empty. By morning, the fog over Marblehaven hung so thick I could barely see the harbor from my kitchen window. I made chicory coffee, buttered a slice of brown soda bread, and sat at Walter's desk with the harbor rights folder open again. That's when I noticed something I'd missed before. A folded yellow document tucked into the back sleeve. Old paper, town seal, Walter's signature, and another name beneath it. Silas Morrow. I recognized it immediately. Silas used to appraise maritime antiques for museums up and down the coast. Walter trusted him more than lawyers, which was saying something. The two of them once spent 3 days arguing over whether a brass chronometer from Nova Scotia was authentic while drinking enough bourbon to tranquilize a horse. I checked the date. 22 years old. Attached was a handwritten note from Walter. "If anybody ever tries forcing a sale, call Silas before signing a damn thing." I sat there staring at those words for a long moment. Walter had seen this possibility coming long before I did. And suddenly, I remembered something else. About 6 months earlier, Nathaniel came by after a storm damaged part of my back fence. While I was making clam fritters in the kitchen, he wandered around the property with his phone out taking pictures. At the time, he claimed he was checking insurance conditions. Now I knew better. He was measuring. The phone rang sharply beside me, yanking me from the memory. Brianna. I let it ring twice before answering. "Clara." Her voice sounded sugary enough to rot teeth. "I hope you're not still upset about dinner." "Should I be?" A tiny pause. "Well, Nathaniel worries you misunderstand practical conversations." Practical again. That word was becoming poison. I understood perfectly. "We just want what's best for you." "No," I said quietly. "You want what's easiest for yourselves." Silence. Then her tone hardened almost imperceptibly. "You know, courts take elder safety very seriously nowadays." There it was. Not concern. Warning. I leaned back slowly in my chair. "Are you threatening me, Brianna?" "Oh, goodness, no. I'm simply saying families sometimes need to step in when people become vulnerable." Vulnerable. Interesting how fast old age becomes a diagnosis when property is involved. I smiled to myself, though she couldn't see it. "Tell Nathaniel something for me," I said calmly. If he wants my house that badly, he should have learned to love it before he learned its market value. Then I hung up, and for the first time since this started, I picked up the phone not to answer my family, but to call a lawyer. The lawyer's office sat above an old watch repair shop near the Eastern Pier, squeezed between a bookstore and a narrow cafe that smelled permanently of cinnamon and burnt sugar. Rain drizzled steadily over Marblehaven as I climbed the stairs, gripping the railing more out of irritation than weakness. The brass plaque on the door read, Marisol Keene, Estate and Property Law. Inside, the office looked nothing like the polished places Nathaniel preferred. No giant glass tables, no fake olive trees, just dark shelves packed with legal books, an old Persian rug, and a radiator that hissed like it held grudges. Marisol herself was younger than I expected, maybe mid-40s. Dark curls pinned carelessly up, silver rings on both hands, sharp eyes that missed absolutely nothing. She didn't call me sweetheart, didn't raise her voice like I was hard of hearing, didn't speak slowly. That alone made me trust her more than half the town. So, she said, sitting across from me with a yellow legal pad, tell me why your son suddenly wants your signature. No wasted time. Good. I handed her the papers from Nathaniel's notary meeting. Marisol read quietly for several minutes. Once she reached page 4, her expression changed almost invisibly. There it is, she muttered. You found the knife, too. Oh, this isn't a knife, she said calmly. This is control. She tapped the clause about diminished cognitive reliability. They left this intentionally vague. Very vague. How vague? Vague enough that one cooperative doctor and one motivated family member could make your life extremely unpleasant. Cold anger settled deeper into my stomach. I thought about Brianna's voice on the phone. Courts take elder safety seriously, not a warning. Preparation. Marisol leaned back in her chair. Tell me honestly, Clara, has your son been pushing assisted living? Yes. Has he mentioned confusion? Memory? Falls? Yes. Has anyone suggested evaluating your competency? I hesitated, then remembered the way Brianna emphasized vulnerable. Yes, I answered quietly. I think they're building toward that. Marisol nodded once, like she'd already expected it. You're not the first older parent this has happened to. That sentence hit harder than I expected, not because it shocked me, because it didn't. I looked around her office toward the rain streaking the windows. Somewhere below us, the bell above the watch shop door jingled faintly. What do I do? I asked. Marisol folded her hands. First, you stop assuming this is emotional. I frowned. Your son may have emotional reasons, she continued, but this is financial strategy now, which means you treat it like business. Business. Walter would have liked her immediately. She pulled the harbor rights folder closer and started reading through the shoreline documents. Halfway through, her eyebrows lifted slightly. Well now. What? Your son's greed may actually save you. I stared at her. Marisol slid one map toward me. This protected harbor access changes everything. Your property isn't just valuable residential land. It's legally sensitive waterfront. So if developers are involved, they'll need clean ownership and clean transfer authority. Any evidence of coercion, competency disputes, or inheritance manipulation could poison the entire acquisition. Suddenly, Nathaniel's urgency made even more sense. He wasn't just impatient. He was racing. Marisol stood and walked toward a filing cabinet. Before we do anything else, I want 3 things handled immediately. She raised one finger. Independent medical evaluation from a doctor they don't control. Second finger. New estate documents drafted privately. Third finger. And most importantly, she looked directly at me. You stop talking to your son without witnesses whenever possible. That one hurt. Not because it was unreasonable, because it was necessary. Before I left, Marisol handed me a business card with notes scribbled on the back. Arthur Fenwick at Harbor Trust Bank, she said. Old school banker, discreet. If anyone's been sniffing around your accounts, he'll know. I tucked the card into my purse. Outside, the rain had gotten heavier. The harbor disappeared behind gray sheets of water, while fishing boats rocked against the docks below. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel old. I felt alert. And somewhere deep down beneath the anger and disappointment, another feeling slowly began taking shape. Resolve. Harbor Trust Bank occupied one of the oldest buildings in Marblehaven, a narrow brick structure that somehow survived every storm, recession, and bad mayor since the 70s. Walter used to joke that the vault downstairs would still be standing after the apocalypse, with Arthur Fenwick politely handing out account statements to the cockroaches. Arthur himself looked almost exactly the same as he had 20 years earlier. Same silver suspenders, same careful posture, same habit of polishing his glasses whenever somebody lied to him. Clara Winslow, he said warmly as I entered his office. Now there's a woman who only visits when something serious is brewing. You always did know me too well. Rain tapped softly against the tall windows behind him while I sat down across the desk. The office smelled faintly of dust, coffee, and old paper money. Arthur noticed the tension in my face almost immediately. What happened? I handed him Marisol's card first. That changed his expression. He leaned back slowly. Ah. Not confusion. Recognition. Interesting. You know her? I know the kinds of situations that send people to her. That told me enough. I explained everything carefully. Nathaniel's sudden push for the will, the transfer clause, Brianna's comments, the pressure about assisted living. Arthur listened without interrupting, fingers folded neatly beneath his chin. Then he opened his desk drawer and removed a thin folder. I was hoping I was wrong, he admitted quietly. A chill moved through me. Wrong about what? Arthur slid several printed requests across the desk. My name sat at the top of every page. Authorization inquiries, account access reviews, asset structure confirmations. All requested within the last 4 months. By Nathaniel. He claimed he was helping organize your long-term financial planning, Arthur said carefully. I denied access because your accounts are private and you never authorized secondary control. I stared at the papers. Nathaniel hadn't just started planning recently. He'd been laying groundwork for months, maybe longer. There's more, Arthur added reluctantly. He pulled out another document. This one carried the logo I already recognized. Cove and Finch Developments. My stomach tightened instantly. They approached us regarding preliminary financing discussions tied to shoreline redevelopment near your property. There it was. Finally, the whole ugly shape of it. Not inheritance, acquisition. Nathaniel wasn't waiting for me to die. He was trying to position himself early enough to cash out while I was still alive. Arthur lowered his voice slightly. Clara, your property's location became extremely valuable after the new marina expansion proposal last year. I thought about Nathaniel walking around my yard taking photos after the storm, measuring, calculating, already spending money in his head. He never asked whether I wanted to sell. Arthur's face hardened faintly. That's because I don't think your wishes were central to the plan. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Downstairs, somewhere in the bank lobby, I heard the muted clack of coin trays and printers humming softly. Ordinary sounds. Meanwhile, my own son was trying to engineer control over my life, piece by piece. Arthur finally broke the silence. There's something else you should understand. He removed his glasses carefully. Once people start building competency cases against elderly relatives, things can escalate quickly. That word again. Competency. Like old age automatically erased a person's right to decide. I'm not losing my mind, I said sharply. I know that, Arthur replied immediately. But courts don't always see families clearly when money's involved. Money. Always money. I suddenly remembered Walter standing in our kitchen years ago after Nathaniel borrowed $10,000 for a failed restaurant investment. Never let a grown man confuse love with access, Walter told me afterward. I should have listened sooner. Arthur handed me another sheet of paper. This is a record of every account solely under your control. Marisol will probably advise restructuring immediately. I took the folder slowly. Then Arthur added one final sentence that stayed with me the entire drive home. Clara, people become very dangerous when they start counting wealth before the funeral. That evening, Marblehaven disappeared beneath a hard coastal storm. Rain hammered the windows so violently it sounded like handfuls of gravel thrown against the glass. The ocean below the bluff churned black and angry, and every few minutes the old house groaned softly, the way wooden houses do when weather presses against them too long. I was halfway through reheating haddock stew when headlights swept across my living room walls. A car door slammed, then another. Not Nathaniel. Too small a car. I opened the front door before the knock even came. Elwyn? My granddaughter stood on the porch, soaked through beneath a dark green raincoat, curls plastered to her cheeks. She held a white bakery box against her chest to protect it from the storm. I brought cannoli, she said breathlessly. The pistachio ones you like. I stared at her for half a second, then stepped aside immediately. Get in here before you drown. The second she entered, warm air hit her rain-soaked clothes, and she shivered hard enough to rattle her teeth. I took her coat while she carried the pastry box carefully into the kitchen, like it contained medical supplies. You didn't drive through this weather for dessert, I said quietly. No. There it was, fear. Not panic exactly, but the kind of tension people carry when they've heard something they weren't supposed to hear. I poured tea while she sat at the kitchen table twisting a napkin between her fingers. Finally, she looked up. Grandma, Dad's planning something. I stayed very still. Outside, thunder rolled low over the harbor. What kind of something? Elwyn swallowed. I wasn't supposed to hear it. Mom thought I'd already left after dinner yesterday. My chest tightened slowly. She and Dad were talking about you in the study. Of course they were. People always discuss old relatives like furniture once inheritance enters the room. What did they say? Elwyn hesitated. Then, quietly, they mentioned a doctor. I set my teacup down carefully. A doctor named Mallory Venn. The name meant nothing to me, but the way she said it did. They said he could evaluate whether you're still capable of making financial decisions. There it was. Not suspicion anymore. Confirmation. I felt strangely calm, almost colder than angry. Alawan rushed forward before I could respond. Grandma, I swear I didn't know about any of this before. Dad kept saying he was just trying to help you. No, I said softly. Your father's trying to help himself. Rainwater dripped steadily from the edge of her sleeves onto my kitchen floor while she stared at me miserably. There's more. Of course there was. Dad already talked about the property sale like it's guaranteed, she whispered. He told Mom once everything transfers, they'll finally be able to pay off the investment debt. Investment debt? Interesting. Nathaniel wasn't just greedy. He was cornered. That explained the pressure, the speed, the desperation beneath his fake patience. I leaned back slowly in my chair while the old kitchen clock ticked above the stove. How bad is it? Elowen looked ashamed, answering for him. Pretty bad. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she reached into her purse and carefully slid something across the table toward me. A folded paper. I opened it. Cove and Finch Developments. Preliminary waterfront redevelopment proposal. My property address typed clearly across the top. I looked up sharply. Where did you get this? It was sitting in Dad's office. Her voice cracked slightly. Grandma, they already estimated how much your land would sell for. Not if. Would. As if my life had already been converted into numbers on a spreadsheet. I stared at the paper while thunder shook the windows again. Then something unexpected happened. I stopped feeling hurt. That part was over now. What replaced it was clearer, sharper, like ice forming cleanly across dark water. Elowen looked frightened by how quiet I became. Grandma. Say something. So I folded the proposal neatly, took one slow sip of tea, and finally answered. Oh, sweetheart, I said calmly. Your father just made the biggest mistake of his life. The next morning, I drove to Portland with Elowen beside me and a locked cedar box resting on the back seat of my Buick. Nathaniel thought, old women spent their mornings knitting and forgetting passwords. Meanwhile, I was transporting half the reason he wanted my property in the first place. Rain still clung to the highways in silver streaks as we passed fishing towns and gray Atlantic water. Elowen barely touched the cranberry scone I bought her at a roadside cafe near Brunswick. You okay? I asked. She nodded too quickly. Dad keeps calling me. How many times? 11. I almost smiled. Good. Let him panic a little. By noon, we reached the east side of Portland, where old brick warehouses had been turned into galleries, cafes, and overpriced stores selling candles named things like Winter Orchard and Sea Salt Library. Silas Morrow's appraisal office sat above an antique marine supply shop with faded life rings hanging in the windows. The bell above the door jingled as we entered. The place smelled wonderful. Old paper, dust, leather, salt air, like memory itself. Silas Morrow looked exactly the way a man named Silas Morrow should look at 78. White beard, suspenders, thick fingers stained with tobacco, and eyes sharp enough to spot fake silver from across a room. Well, I'll be damned, he muttered when he saw me. Clara Winslow. You're still ugly. And you're still dangerous. Good. He grinned. Elowen blinked between us while I placed the cedar box carefully on his table. Silas opened it slowly. Inside sat Walter's old maritime collection. Brass sextant, ship chronometer, navigation compass, hand-drawn harbor charts, and Walter's leather-bound restoration journals. Silas went silent almost immediately. That alone told me enough. He picked up the sextant first, turning it carefully beneath the hanging lamp. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "Walter kept this?" He restored it himself. Silas checked the engraving and let out a low whistle. 1896. British naval manufacture. He looked at me sharply. "Do you have any idea what this is worth?" "I'm beginning to." For nearly an hour he inspected everything, while Elowen and I sat quietly nearby, drinking bitter espresso from tiny porcelain cups. Outside, gulls screamed over the harbor rooftops. Finally, Silas removed his glasses. "Clara, this collection alone could stop a desperate man from sleeping." That sentence settled heavily into the room. Desperate. Exactly. Nathaniel wasn't behaving like someone casually interested in inheritance anymore. He was behaving like a man racing against pressure. Silas carefully opened one of Walter's journals next. Several folded papers slipped loose from the pages. One landed upside down near me. I reached for it automatically, then froze. Walter's handwriting. Not repair notes, a letter, addressed to me. My throat tightened instantly. "Read it," Silas said quietly. So I did. "Clara, if you're reading this, it probably means somebody's trying to turn this house into numbers instead of a home. Don't let loud people rush you. And don't let Nathaniel mistake inheritance for entitlement. The harbor gave us a life because we respected it. Anyone trying to sell it without understanding that has already lost the right to it." I stopped reading for a moment. Even dead 11 years, Walter still sounded exactly like himself. Blunt, calm, unshakable. At the bottom of the page, one final sentence waited. "And if our son ever forgets who built this family, remind him." I folded the letter carefully while emotion climbed slowly into my chest like rising tidewater. Elowen reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Silas pretended not to notice. Good man. Then he leaned forward seriously. "Clara, if developers are circling, you need legal protection immediately. Collections like this complicate estate fights, especially if they're historically registered." "Can they be?" He smiled faintly. "Oh, I think Walter made sure of that already." Of course he did. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt something stronger than anger. I felt prepared. And somewhere far away in Marblehaven, my son still believed I was the easiest person in the family to outmaneuver. Nathaniel came to my house 2 days later carrying pastries and pretending to be a son again. That alone told me he was nervous. My son never bought croissants unless guilt or money stood nearby. I watched through the front window as he climbed my porch steps, holding a white bakery box from Maison Beauchamp, the expensive French place downtown, where every dessert looked too delicate to survive weather. When I opened the door, he smiled too quickly. "Thought you might like almond brioche." "I thought you hated spending $12 on bread." His smile flickered. "Well, people change." No, I thought. They reveal. I let him inside. Nathaniel moved through the house, glancing around carefully, almost unconsciously. Not like a guest. Like a man checking the condition of an investment property. That angered me more than I expected. He used to run through these rooms barefoot, holding toy boats Walter carved for him. Now his eyes measured square footage. I carried the pastries into the kitchen while he loosened his coat and sat down at the table. "You've been hard to reach," he said casually. "I've been busy." "Doing what?" "Protecting my sanity." That earned me a tight exhale through his nose. The old kitchen clock ticked loudly between us while I poured coffee into Walter's blue enamel mugs. Nathaniel used to love those mugs as a child because they made him feel like a fisherman. Now he probably thought they looked cheap. "I think we got off on the wrong foot," he finally said. Interesting phrase, considering he'd spent weeks trying to legally remove my footing entirely. I wasn't aware we'd restarted our relationship. "Mom?" There it was again, the controlled patience, like he was speaking to somebody unstable. He slid a folder across the table. "Graham updated the paperwork. Simpler this time." I didn't touch it. Nathaniel leaned forward slightly. "You know this doesn't have to become some huge family issue." Family issue. Not betrayal, not manipulation, just paperwork complications. Funny how greed always changes vocabulary first. I finally opened the folder. Different formatting. Cleaner language. But the poison remained underneath. Transfer authorization. Financial oversight. Emergency guardianship provisions. Only now they'd hidden the uglier parts deeper inside legal wording, dense enough to suffocate ordinary people. Unfortunately for him, I wasn't ordinary. "You know," I said quietly while flipping pages, "your father used to test engines by listening instead of looking." Nathaniel frowned. "What?" "He said machines tell the truth faster through sound." I looked up at him calmly. "People do too." His jaw tightened. "I'm trying to help you." "No. You're trying to position me." Silence. Outside, fog drifted low across the harbor cliffs, while gulls screamed somewhere beyond the rocks below the bluff. Nathaniel rubbed his forehead. "You really think I'm some kind of villain now?" I studied him carefully. The expensive watch, the tired eyes, the tension sitting permanently behind his shoulders. Then I remembered what Elowen told me. Investment debt. "How bad is it?" I asked quietly. He froze. There. For half a second, the mask slipped. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." Nathaniel stood abruptly and walked toward the sink, pretending interest in the rain outside my kitchen window. "You wouldn't understand." That almost made me laugh. I balanced payroll during fuel shortages in the 80s, negotiated with insurance inspectors after hurricanes, buried a husband while keeping a business alive. But apparently, I couldn't understand debt. "I understand desperation perfectly," I replied. His shoulders stiffened. Then came the mistake. "You're sitting on millions, Mom. Not memories, not history, not Walter's house. Millions." And suddenly, the room felt very small. Nathaniel turned back too late, realizing what he'd admitted aloud. I closed the folder carefully. "That's what this is really about." "No," he said immediately, too fast. "It's about making sure things are handled responsibly." "Then why are developers involved?" The color drained from his face. Beautiful thing, silence. People reveal entire crimes inside it. "You went through my things?" Elowen found enough. At the mention of her name, irritation flashed across his face. So that was how he looked at loyalty now. As inconvenience. He sat down heavily again, voice colder this time. "You're letting people poison you against your own family." No, I answered calmly. I'm finally hearing my family clearly. Nathaniel stared at me for several long seconds. Then his expression changed completely. The softness disappeared. The patience evaporated. What remained underneath looked tired, angry, and frighteningly entitled. You can't manage all this forever, he said quietly. Not concern, pressure. I folded my hands together on the table. Watch me. 3 days later, Nathaniel invited me to what he called a family discussion. That phrase alone sounded like legal fees waiting to happen. He insisted we meet at his house again, said Brianna wanted everyone comfortable, said a professional would also be there, just to help clarify future planning. Professional. Another poisonous little word. I arrived 10 minutes early on purpose. The moment Brianna opened the door, I smelled saffron risotto and expensive candles trying too hard to hide tension. Nobody cooks comfort food before a peaceful conversation. They cook it before interventions. Clara, Brianna greeted smoothly. You look well. So do undertakers. Her smile froze for half a second. Good. Inside the dining room sat Nathaniel, a gray-haired man in a navy suit I didn't recognize, and another man arranging papers neatly beside a leather briefcase. Elowen sat near the window, looking miserable. Nathaniel stood quickly. Mom, thanks for coming. I looked toward the strangers. And these would be? The older man extended a hand first. Dr. Mallory Venn. There it was, not rumor anymore. Confirmation. The second man smiled stiffly. Graham Lyle? We met before? Yes, I said. You were the man trying to hand my son my life wrapped in legal language. Nobody laughed except Elowen, who quickly hid it with her water glass. Nathaniel pulled out a chair for me. Can we please just have a calm conversation? Interesting thing about people demanding calm. Usually they already know they're wrong. I sat slowly at the end of the table while rain streaked the enormous windows overlooking the cliffs. Waves crashed below the property in dull gray bursts. Dr. Venn folded his hands. Mrs. Winslow, your family simply wants reassurance that you're supported appropriately as you age. I own a smoke detector and a shotgun. I feel supported. Nathaniel sighed sharply. Mom? No, I interrupted softly. Let's stop pretending this is about concern. Silence tightened instantly around the table. Brianna jumped in too quickly. Nobody's attacking you. Another sentence guilty people adore. Graham slid several papers toward me. These updated documents are merely precautionary. I didn't touch them. Instead, I looked directly at Dr. Venn. Tell me something, doctor. Did my son contact you before or after speaking with Cove and Finch Developments? Nathaniel went pale so fast it was almost impressive. Brianna straightened immediately. What does that have to do with anything? Exactly the reaction I wanted. Dr. Venn frowned slightly. I'm not familiar with... Oh, I think everyone here is familiar, I said calmly. Nathaniel leaned forward now, voice low and dangerous. You've been digging through private matters. No, I replied. I've been digging through mine. Elowen looked between all of us like she was watching a bridge collapse in slow motion. Then Nathaniel made the mistake angry people always make. He lost patience before he secured control. You are making this embarrassing, he snapped. Why can't you just sign the damn papers? The room went dead silent. Even Brianna looked startled. And that was the moment I knew. He'd finally stopped pretending to be my son. Now he sounded like a man furious an investment refused to cooperate. I folded my hands calmly on the table, then said the one sentence that changed the entire room. Because, Nathaniel, I already made a different will. Nathaniel stared at me like I'd just overturned the table. You what? His voice cracked slightly on the last word. Beautiful. I folded my hands neatly in my lap while thunder rolled somewhere beyond the cliffs outside. Brianna looked toward Graham so fast you'd think the man could legally resurrect control from the dead. You heard me, I said calmly. I made a different will. Without discussing it with family? Brianna asked sharply. There it was again. That word. Family. Funny how people suddenly rediscover family once inheritance starts moving away from them. Elowyn sat completely still near the window now, eyes fixed on her father. I could practically see the moment she realized this conversation had never been about my health. Nathaniel forced a hollow laugh. Mom, come on. You're upset. Let's not make emotional decisions. I almost smiled. Men love calling women emotional, right before panicking themselves. Oh, Nathaniel, I said softly. If I were emotional, I would have changed the locks and thrown your baby pictures into the harbor. That landed hard. Dr. Venn shifted uncomfortably in his chair, while Graham quietly closed part of his folder, sensing the wind changing direction. Then the front doorbell rang. Brianna frowned immediately. Were we expecting someone? I was, I answered. Nathaniel's face changed. Not confusion. Fear. Footsteps crossed the hallway. Then Marisol Keene entered the dining room carrying a slim leather portfolio and rainwater still shining across the shoulders of her charcoal coat. The silence after that felt magnificent. Good evening, she said calmly. Nathaniel stood so quickly, his chair scraped violently against the floor. What the hell is this? My attorney, I replied. And look at this table now. The sun, the doctor, the paperwork, the pressure. And suddenly, the old woman walks in with her own lawyer. Tell me honestly, what would you do in Clara's place after all these lies? Marisol placed her portfolio on the table with surgical calm. Before this continues, she said, my client requested I clarify several legal matters. Nathaniel laughed nervously. This is insane. No, Marisol corrected. This is documented. That word hit him harder than shouting would have. Documented. She opened the portfolio and slid several papers across the table. Mrs. Winslow completed an independent medical evaluation yesterday morning, she continued, conducted by Dr. Evelyn Price, board certified in cognitive medicine. Dr. Venn's expression tightened immediately. Marisol kept going. The results found no evidence whatsoever of diminished capacity, impaired judgment, memory instability, or financial incompetence. Nathaniel's jaw flexed. Brianna crossed her arms defensively. Nobody said Clara was incompetent. Marisol slowly pulled out another sheet. Oh? Then perhaps you can explain why Dr. Venn was invited to a private signing discussion involving guardianship language. Silence. Heavy silence. The kind that exposes people more effectively than accusations. Nathaniel looked toward Dr. Venn. This was supposed to be informal. I was told your mother requested support, the doctor answered carefully. I laughed softly before I could stop myself. That startled everyone. "You know what's funny?" I said quietly. "Nobody asked me what I wanted even once." Nathaniel rubbed both hands over his face now, losing control inch by inch. "Mom, you're blowing this completely out of proportion." "No," I answered. "You underestimated me completely." Then Marisol delivered the real blow. She pressed a small digital recorder onto the table and hit play. Nathaniel's own voice filled the room instantly. The old woman almost signed. Nobody moved. Not Brianna. Not Graham. Not even Dr. Venn. Nathaniel went white. "You recorded me?" "No," I said calmly. "You exposed yourself." His breathing changed after that. Faster. Sharper. Like a man watching a deal collapse in real time. And maybe he was. Because for the first time since this began, nobody at that table was looking at me like I was fragile anymore. Now they were looking at Nathaniel. Nathaniel looked at the recorder like it had personally betrayed him. For a few long seconds, nobody spoke. Rain hammered against the windows overlooking the cliffs, while the dining room sat frozen around that single sentence. The old woman almost signed. Brianna recovered first. "This proves nothing," she snapped. Marisol calmly folded her hands. "Actually, it proves intent." Nathaniel slammed his palm against the table hard enough to rattle the silverware. "Oh, for God's sake, enough with the legal drama?" "No," I said quietly. "Now, we finally begin the truth." He turned toward me so quickly, his chair nearly tipped backward. "You think you're teaching me some lesson right now?" I studied my son carefully. Really studied him, the flushed face, the panic behind the anger, the exhaustion around his eyes. This wasn't just greed anymore. This was collapse. And suddenly, I understood something important. Nathaniel hadn't come here expecting resistance. He came expecting surrender. That realization hardened something permanent inside me. Marisol opened another folder slowly. "Mrs. Winslow's revised estate structure has already been filed and notarized," she announced, "as of 48 hours ago." Nathaniel stared at her. "What estate structure?" "The one you're no longer part of." Silence again. Heavy. Violent. Brianna's face lost color first. "Excuse me?" I reached calmly into my purse and removed a folded document. "My new will." Nathaniel laughed once under his breath, not amused. Cornered. "You're bluffing." "No," I said softly. "Your father taught me to finish paperwork before confrontation." That one hurt him. I could see it. Mentioning Walter always did. Because deep down, Nathaniel knew exactly when he started disappointing his father. Marisol began reading portions aloud. The residence located at 14 Harbor Bluff Road, including all maritime access rights, shoreline protections, dock permits, workshop structures, and historical easements. Nathaniel's face slowly drained again. "Shall transfer upon Clara Winslow's death into the newly established Winslow Harbor Trust." "No," he interrupted immediately. "No, absolutely not." Marisol ignored him. "The trust prohibits all commercial redevelopment, private shoreline acquisition, or transfer to corporate development entities including Cove and Finch developments." Brianna inhaled sharply. There it was. Confirmation. They already had plans in motion. Nathaniel looked genuinely sick now. "You can't do this." "I already did." His composure finally cracked completely. That property is worth millions. Not home, not family. Millions. Elowen closed her eyes briefly, like the words physically hurt to hear. I looked at my son for a long moment before answering. You know what your father used to call men like this? Nathaniel said nothing. Temporary. The room went dead silent again. Marisol continued. A separate educational and residential trust has been established for Clara Winslow. My granddaughter looked up sharply. Grandma? You were the only person in this family who showed up without an invoice attached. Tears filled her eyes immediately. Nathaniel looked stunned. You're giving everything to her? No, I corrected calmly. I'm protecting it from you. Brianna stood abruptly. This is manipulation. I almost laughed. Interesting accusation coming from a woman who brought a doctor to dinner. Then came the final section. The one I'd thought about the longest. Marisol glanced toward me carefully before reading. To Nathaniel Winslow, Clara Winslow leaves one item only, the brass key currently stored inside Walter Winslow's workshop desk. Nathaniel frowned in confusion. Then recognition hit him. The old brass key? The one from Walter's boat workshop. Years ago, Nathaniel used it to lock the workshop after secretly selling several of Walter's Japanese chisels to cover gambling debt during a business slump. He thought I never knew. I did. I simply waited. You remember now, don't you? I asked quietly. Nathaniel couldn't even look at me. That key, I continued softly, is the last thing your father trusted you with. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the storm outside seemed quieter suddenly. Then Nathaniel whispered the saddest sentence I'd heard all night. So that's it? I looked directly at my son. No, I answered calmly. This is just the first time your actions finally cost you something. Nathaniel left the house without saying goodbye, not dramatically, not angrily, just hollow, like a man walking away from a burning building while still trying to calculate what survived inside. The front door slammed hard enough to shake the framed harbor painting near Brianna's staircase. A few seconds later, his car engine roared to life, tires spitting gravel down the wet driveway. Nobody at the table moved immediately after. Dr. Venn quietly gathered his coat first. Smart man. He understood when a room stopped being medical and became personal. I believe my presence is no longer necessary, he muttered. Marisol gave him a polite nod. Probably not. Brianna looked furious enough to crack porcelain. This isn't over, she said sharply, staring directly at me. No, I replied calmly. It's finally honest. That one hit her harder than yelling would have. Because people like Brianna survive through appearances, respectability, controlled narratives. And tonight, the narrative collapsed right in front of witnesses. Elowen walked me to the front door while Marisol stayed behind collecting documents. Outside, the storm had weakened into cold mist rolling over the cliffs. Nathaniel's taillights were already gone. I'm sorry, Elowen whispered suddenly. I turned toward her carefully. For what? For all of it. For not seeing it sooner. Oh, sweetheart. I touched her cheek gently. You were the only one actually looking. That nearly made her cry again. The next morning, Marblehaven exploded. Small towns survive on three things: weather, gossip, and resentment. And by breakfast, apparently everyone knew some version of what happened at Nathaniel's house. I discovered that when Doris Pike at the Harbor Bakery handed me my cinnamon cruller and said, "Well, good for you," I blinked. "Excuse me?" She leaned across the counter conspiratorially. "Men around here have been trying to steal waterfront property from widows since before electricity. You just happened to fight back prettier." By noon, the first real damage arrived. Not emotional, financial. Arthur Fenwick called me directly. Cove and Finch withdrew. I stood at my kitchen window watching fog drift over the water. Completely? Immediately. Marisol filed preservation notices at 8 this morning. Of course she did. Arthur sounded almost impressed. Once the historical trust documentation appeared, the developers vanished overnight. They don't want lawsuits or elder coercion allegations attached to waterfront redevelopment. Translation: Nathaniel's deal was dead. I thanked Arthur and hung up slowly. For a long moment, I just stood there listening to gulls outside. Then my phone rang again. Nathaniel. This time I answered. Silence waited on the line first. Then breathing. Tired breathing. Finally, "You ruined everything." No hello, no mother, just accusation. I closed my eyes briefly. "No," I said quietly. "I stopped you before you ruined me. You don't understand how bad this is now." "I think I understand perfectly." His voice sharpened. "I had investors involved." There it was. Not family desperation. Business collapse. "How much debt?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. That answer told me enough already. Then finally, "Too much." I looked toward Walter's old workshop through the kitchen window. The small, weathered building still stood against the shoreline, exactly where it always had. Nathaniel had nearly traded his father's entire life for leverage, and somehow, he still wanted sympathy. "You should have told me the truth," I said softly. "I couldn't." "No," I corrected. "You chose not to." Silence again. Then his voice lowered into something smaller, younger. "They were going to take the house." For the first time in this entire nightmare, I heard actual fear instead of entitlement. Real fear. Not for me, for himself. I leaned slowly against the counter. "How much gambling debt, Nathaniel?" The silence after that lasted so long I heard the refrigerator motor kick on. Then quietly, "How did you know?" Walter always used to say desperation leaves fingerprints. And suddenly, every missing piece finally fit together. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Rainwater dripped steadily from the gutters outside my kitchen window, while Nathaniel breathed unevenly on the other end of the line. Then he said, the one thing I never expected to hear from my son. It started small. Not denial, not excuses. Confession. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table Walter built 40 years earlier from salvaged oak planks taken off an abandoned fishing trawler. How small? Sports betting at first, Nathaniel admitted quietly. Then investment losses. Then loans. I closed my eyes briefly. Not because I was shocked, because suddenly every missing year made sense. The rushed money requests, the nervous phone calls, the desperation hidden beneath expensive suits and polished dinners. How much do you owe? Another long silence. Almost 900,000. The number landed heavily inside my chest. Not because of the amount, Because my son had destroyed himself chasing a lifestyle he could never actually afford. You should have come to me honestly. I was ashamed. No, I said quietly. You were proud, and pride rots people faster than debt. He inhaled sharply through his nose. For the first time in weeks, he sounded less like a manipulator and more like a tired little boy caught breaking something he couldn't repair. I never wanted to hurt you. That sentence almost broke my heart. Almost. But then I remembered the doctor, the paperwork, the competency trap, the way he looked at my home like inventory. You already did. Silence. Then finally, what happens now? I looked out toward Walter's workshop near the shoreline. 2 teenagers from town were helping repaint the side wall this morning. Elowen stood nearby laughing with them while holding a cup of coffee bigger than her hand. Life moved strangely fast after Truth entered a room. Marisol finalized the harbor trust within days. The workshop would stay protected permanently now. Local volunteers had already started helping restore the old place. Someone donated woodworking tools. Someone else offered free roofing materials. Turns out communities still exist when greed steps aside, long enough for people to recognize each other again. I don't know what happens now, I admitted honestly. That depends on whether you want forgiveness or access. Nathaniel said nothing. Good. Because there's a difference. People confuse those things constantly. After we hung up, I walked down toward the workshop slowly, the cold ocean wind pulling at my coat. The harbor smelled like salt, engine fuel, and wet cedar. Walter would have loved this morning. Inside the workshop, sunlight spilled through dusty windows onto old benches scarred by decades of work. Elowen sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting brass fittings into boxes, while soft jazz played from somebody's radio nearby. You okay? She asked gently when she saw me. I looked around the room, at the tools, the walls, the history, the life that almost became a transaction. Then I smiled. Yes, I said truthfully. I think I finally am. Elowen walked over and wrapped her arms around me carefully. Not because I was fragile, because I mattered. Outside, gulls wheeled above the gray Atlantic, while waves crashed endlessly against the rocks below Marblehaven. And for the first time in a very long while, I no longer felt like a woman waiting to be erased. I felt like the rightful owner of my own life again. And honestly, Clara didn't leave her son with nothing because she was cruel. She did it because respect matters more than inheritance. If this story hit you somewhere personal, leave a like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments. Would you ever forgive Nathaniel after everything he did?